At 11:30 p.m., the skies over Poland looked calm, but on the radar screens, operators saw something terrifying. 19 objects, moving low, slow, and silent, slipping across the border from Belarus. At first, they looked like nothing more than clutter, but then the dots multiplied. 3, 6, 9, until the screens lit up with 19 intruders. They weren't jets, they weren't missiles, they were Russian drones, and they weren't flying toward Ukraine. They were headed straight into NATO airspace. Sirens ripped through the night. F-16 pilots sprinted to their jets. Patriot crews rushed into position. Civilians in eastern Poland were jolted awake by emergency alerts on their phones. And here's the twist. These drones weren't just weapons. They were bait. A trap designed to trick Poland into making a mistake so big it could tilt the entire war. But Moscow miscalculated badly. At first, Poland's radar crews thought it was nothing. The tracks were too small, too scattered, almost like noise in the system. A few blips here and there, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. But then the numbers started climbing. 3, 6, 9. Within minutes, the screens were crawling with 19 separate intruders, all flying the exact same path, hugging the tree line at barely 200 meters. This wasn't random. It was synchronized. A swarm. The operators knew immediately this wasn't a weather glitch, and it wasn't an accident. Each object was moving deliberately, slow enough to avoid missiles, low enough to hide in ground clutter. And worst of all, they weren't stopping at the border. These drones were diving straight into the heart of Poland. Inside the command center, tension spiked. It was no longer a question of if they were hostile, but when they would be engaged. Because 19 drones don't just drift across NATO's defenses by mistake, and the decision to act would come in CC. Within minutes, Poland's quiet night erupted into chaos. Alarms blared across air bases in the east. F-16 pilots bolted from their barracks, sprinting to the flight line as engines screamed to life. On the ground, Patriot missile crews rushed to their stations. Launch canisters locked into place, radars swept low over the countryside, and operators braced for the first command to fire. Even civilians weren't spared. In towns near Lublin, cell phones buzzed with emergency alerts, and sirens tore through the silence. Windows shook as fighter jets roared overhead, vanishing into the darkness. But inside Poland's command center, it wasn't panic. It was precision. Every radar ping, every drone track, every order was being fed into NATO's network in real time. From Brussels to Berlin, Allied screens lit up with the same swarm Poland was now facing alone. And here's the catch. Responding wasn't as simple as just pulling the trigger. Every shot would reveal radar positions, missile capabilities, and reaction times, exactly the data Moscow was hungry to capture. The question wasn't can NATO stop the drones, it was how to stop them without walking into the trap. On the surface, it looked simple. Drones were crossing into NATO airspace, and Poland had the weapons to bring them down. But buried inside that swarm was Moscow's real strategy. Every move Poland made, every radar sweep, every missile launch, every scramble order was being watched, logged, and studied. By forcing Poland to fire, Russia could map out the alliance's defenses in real time. It wasn't about destroying cities. It wasn't even about hitting targets. It was about exposing NATO's secrets. And the bait was cheap. 19 expendable drones that cost almost nothing to build, but could unlock priceless intelligence if NATO revealed too much. Inside Poland's command centers, everyone knew it. One wrong move, one over. Eager launch, and Moscow would learn exactly how fast the defenses reacted, where they were strongest and, more dangerously, where they were weak. But instead of panicking, Poland played it differently. They didn't just fire wildly into the night. They coordinated, held discipline, and fed the swarm into NATO's broader network. The Kremlin thought it had set the trap, but in reality, it was walking straight into one itself. At 12:47 a.m., the silence finally broke. A Patriot interceptor roared into the sky from near Lublin, locking onto a drone barely visible on radar. Seconds later, the blip vanished. The first kill of the night, but it was only the beginning. For the next 7 hours, Poland fought a battle unlike anything NATO had ever faced on its own soil. One by one, the 19 intruders were tracked, jammed, and eliminated. Some were blown apart by surface-to-air missiles, scattering wreckage across empty fields. Others simply dropped from the sky as Polish electronic warfare units jammed their GPS signals, leaving them blind and helpless. F-16s thundered overhead, not wasting precious missiles, but circling, escorting, and feeding live coordinates to ground batteries. It wasn't a dogfight, it was a chess match, with radar, jammers, and carefully rationed firepower. On the ground, Civilians lived a different story. Sirens echoed through the night. Windows rattled as missiles launched. Families huddled in basements, unsure if the drones were carrying explosives or just passing overhead. For them, it was chaos, but inside the command network, it was control. Each drone tracked, each launch calculated, each interception logged and shared instantly across NATO's systems. By dawn, the verdict was clear. All 19 intruders were gone. Some Polish officials claimed the number was higher, closer to 23. But one thing was certain, Moscow's swarm hadn't broken NATO's defenses. It had tested them, and the test had failed. When the sun finally rose over eastern Poland, the swarm was gone. Wreckage lay scattered. Across forests and fields, broken wings jutting from the ground like twisted metal tombstones. On the surface, it looked like a win for Russia. 19 cheap drones exchanged for NATO, exposing its most advanced defenses. But in reality, it was the opposite. Every drone shot down was more than debris. It was data. Circuit boards, antennas, navigation chips. Each piece carried fingerprints of where it was built, how it was modified, and which unit launched it. Engineers were already combing through the fragments before the smoke cleared. Even more valuable were the signals. Throughout the night, NATO radars, jammers, and infrared sensors recorded everything: frequencies, control handshakes, thermal signatures. That data now sat in NATO's threat libraries, ready to identify and neutralize the next wave faster than ever. Russia had hoped to rattle nerves and expose weaknesses. Instead, it revealed its own playbook. The drones that were supposed to test NATO's defenses ended up strengthening them. For Moscow, what began as a low-cost provocation turned into a high-cost lesson. The swarm didn't fracture the alliance, it tightened it. Poland showed discipline, NATO showed speed, and the Kremlin showed its hand. The swarm over Poland wasn't a one-off incident. It was part of a larger pattern that had been building for years. In 2023, fragments of Russian drones crashed into Romania during strikes on Ukrainian ports. In 2024, unidentified UAVs buzzed along the Baltic, forcing German Eurofighters to scramble. Each time, Moscow claimed it was an accident. Each time, officials insisted the drones had simply drifted off course. But the pattern is too clear to ignore. Push the borders, probe the defenses, watch how NATO reacts. The swarm was just the boldest version yet. 19 drones crossing deep into NATO territory in perfect formation. Not to hit targets, but to measure resolve. To make eastern Poland feel as vulnerable as Kiev or Odessa. But instead of sowing fear, the tactic backfired. NATO didn't hesitate. Within hours, consultations were underway, jets were shifting east, and allies who might have stayed silent a decade ago were suddenly speaking in one voice. For the Kremlin, that's the real danger. Every test meant to divide the alliance is closing the seams even tighter. Every drone that slips across a border only strengthens the shield it was meant to weaken. And Poland's response sent a message far louder than Moscow's provocation. If you probe NATO skies, expect to be met with fire, unity, and eyes wide open. By dawn, the swarm was gone. Poland had done what no NATO ally had ever faced before, intercepting a coordinated drone attack inside its own skies. Moscow's plan to rattle nerves had collapsed, and instead, it handed NATO new data, stronger defenses, and even tighter unity. But one question still lingers. If you were the one sitting in Poland's command center that night, 19 hostile drones lighting up your radar, what would you do? Do you fire immediately, knowing every shot could reveal your defenses? Or do you wait, risking that even one might slip through? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because that's the very dilemma commanders debate even today. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Because one thing is certain, this won't be the last time NATO skies are tested. And when it happens again, we'll be right here to unpack it for you.